So this week we asked the panel if they would vote in a general election tomorrow, who would they vote for? With Labour's lead increasing, of course, from 32 points now to 34.
Wow. We also asked if people would vote to rejoin the EU. 41% of our panel were in favour of rejoining, 32 against, with 20% who preferred not to say. Now, I'm very surprised at that.
I am, actually. I think everybody's just a bit fed up with everything at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, we also asked our panel, would they support Liz Truss in loosening immigration rules? 32% support the PM, 27% against.
Oh.
Interesting.
Not the results I was expecting. Got to be honest. Probably not the results you were expecting, I would imagine. Anyway, let's talk to academic and professor of politics, Matt Goodwin. Matt, morning to you. Can we start off with the EU one? Because I think that's the most interesting out of all of them at the moment. What's going on?
Well, what we've seen over the last year is a pretty steady decline in support for staying out of the European Union. We've got a general sense that Brexit isn't being managed well. Things aren't going as well as perhaps they could be outside of the European Union. We've got, as Anne just said, a lot of disillusionment with the government, and that's finding its expression in these kinds of questions.
Why politicians would, of course, look at that and say, you know, that's a poll. It doesn't mean anything. The only poll that's important is the election itself. And to a certain extent, they're right then, aren't they? You say things to a pollster that you don't necessarily vote.
Well, I would say polls historically have a very good record. And I think particularly on things like seeing events coming, for example, polls very accurate with Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson, last general election. Many of the polls got the Brexit vote right. So, yeah, generally speaking, polls have a pretty good record. And I think with this particular one this week, to me, what stands out actually is what's happening with Liz Truss and the Conservative Party. And this is why the Chancellor's flying home. We find the Conservative Party vote now is 19%. That is the lowest share of the vote that we have on record for the Conservative Party. The only time the party has gone lower than that in recent history, our viewers will remember, was during the spring of 2019, just around the time that all of the parties were imploding over Brexit. So this is crisis time for the Conservative Party. This is, you know, looking at wipeout time if this were replicated in an election.
The problem they've got, though, is what they do about it. Because, you know, well, I mean, they can do a U-turn on the mini-budget. I hope that stabilises the markets and things get back on an even keel, as it were. But if they start, and it's in a lot of the papers about Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt and all the rest of it with a takeover bid, if they start trying to elect a new leader and a new Prime Minister, that is going to force a general election, isn't it? I mean, there's going to be no way around it. So, in fact, it will be the worst of all timings for them.
Well, there are no good options for the Conservative Party at this point. They took the decision to get rid of Boris Johnson, to remove him from office, and then they took a punt that Conservative Party members would come up with somebody who's more appealing. That just hasn't happened. As we find this week, only 9% of the country think favourably of Liz Truss. That means she is less popular than both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, to give you a sort of comparison on that 9%, she's basically roughly where Prince Andrew is in popularity. So it's not a great place for the Prime Minister to be. Now, what could the party do? Well, they could have a sort of unofficial coronation of sorts, not going back to Conservative Party members, have another leadership race where perhaps the second place candidate drops out so they don't have to go to the membership. That idea has been suggested only yesterday. They could have another full leadership election where they go through everything all over again and perhaps hope and pray that somebody with more appeal cuts through. But for the country, and I'm sure many viewers will relate to this, for the country, the problem for the Conservative Party is this is just reinforcing a sense they're not dealing with the issues and they're a divided party. And parties that are seen to be divided, Stephen, don't win elections.
No, and I don't know whether the country would put up with that at all, would they? I mean, Keir Starmer and a lot of other parties would probably put forward some sort of a vote of no confidence and bring the government down to a general election, wouldn't they? in that instance?
Well, they might not have the numbers for that, although I would imagine many Conservative MPs are probably thinking to themselves, it may be better at this point to have a general election and face the music than try and get through another 2 years. I mean, that's certainly been expressed to me within Westminster by some MPs. Look, I mean, I think as well, let's not forget that before we get to this sort of point, and we may not get there, the first thing that we are going to see today, tomorrow, is Liz Truss trying to stabilise this premiership, and that will include a number of U-turns. And U-turns generally are always pretty bad for an incumbent prime minister. We even find in our polling, on the one hand, people say, yep, she was good to do a U-turn on the tax break for high earners. But then in the next question, they say they think she was weak for giving seeing that change through. So she's sort of boxed in here. So what we'll see over the next few weeks is her trying to get out of that box by making concessions to her critics, probably losing one, maybe two of her very prominent allies, and then trying to steady the ship and convince financial markets that she's got what it takes.